says preparing to live stream. Setting up your YouTube live. And we are now live. Okay, good morning, everybody, and especially the folks on YouTube. We are now on page 67 of the new edition of Mikomecha from the Rebbe Maharash, and we're continuing the Maimon. And we're in a section that says the four elements. And we just read in the previous section the Targum Yonason, the translation of Yonason, who says, Mikomecha, B'Elim Hashem, he translates it as there's none, the question is, it's written as a question, who is like you among the supernal beings? And obviously Targum Yonason sees that as a rhetorical question. And he puts it into this way of saying that essentially what he's saying is there is none like you among the among the supernal beings. And that's the way he says it. And basically the idea being that the only true existence is Hashem and all other existences are not true existences. But that sort of implies that they exist. But not as true existences. You can't compare their existence to the existence of Hashem. They sort of exist as transient existences, but not true existences. But since they're only transient existences, we don't consider them real existences. But Onkelos explains it even more emphatically, as we see at the bottom of page 43. According to Onkelos's translation, there's nothing besides you. We can say the following. When you carefully examine the nature of all physical beings, when you contemplate them well, you will find that all physical beings are not truly physical. And I actually was editorializing a moment. I'm saying this is getting written in 1869. And it's being written by the Rebbe Maharash. And by 1869, the world was very excited with trying to figure out how the physics of the world. And there'd been tremendous discoveries, although some of the biggest discoveries were waiting for the 20th century. But there was still a tremendously sophisticated understanding of things that had developed in the world yet. And it's known that the Rebbe Maharash did not live in a bubble. The Rebbe Maharash, of all the Rebbeim, probably had the greatest awareness of everything that was happening in the world. And my guess is, we know he was reading the newspapers and he traveled extensively. And so the Rebbe Maharash knew what was happening in the world. And I would venture to suggest that what he's going to be writing is being written with a broad awareness of what's happening in the world of physics at the time when he's living. And what I'm going to say, though, he's not going to talk in that language. And you'll find that the Rebbe did the same thing. The Rebbe who studied physics extensively, and modern physics in universities in the 20th century, who was well aware, and we see from his correspondence we see from his correspondence, and we also see from the sikhs and from his correspondence, as well as from the what we heard from people about what they discovered in private meetings with the Rebbe. The Rebbe was absolutely well aware of what was happening in the world. But when it came time to teaching Chassidus, he would still talk in the classic language, of traditional approach to these things. So we're going to use classical language over here, but the ideas don't have to be limited to classical language, if you understand what I'm saying. Because the concept, the concept is the same concept. It just doesn't, it makes no difference how you actually frame it. And there's a truth to the classical formations that you don't get in the modern, because classifications, a lot of how physics works is with classifications. And there's an advantage to the modern classification systems, but there's also an advantage to the classic systems. So over here we use the classic systems. He says like this: when you carefully examine the nature of all physical beings, when you contemplate them well, you will find that all physical beings are not truly physical. And by the way, physicists are discovering this more and more. Take the substance of wood, for example, which is made up of the four elements: fire, air, water, and earth. Although it contains each of the four elements, its substance is not any one of them. Rather, its primary being is the power that combines the four elements.
Like the word.
It follows then that the primary substance is the thing that combines the elements and thereby creates and sustains it, namely the utterance of God. So what holds it all together, making the unique form of this particular substance that's in front of you, and in this case, we're talking about wood, it's the word of Hashem that brought it into existence, that combines all these things together and brings it into existence in this way. In a second, Josh, when the wood is burned, all that remains is ash, which is from the element of earth within the wood. The three elements, fire, water, and air, leave through the smoke. Nevertheless, the ash itself also contains the four elements. So the true essence of even ash is not any one of the four elements, but rather the thing that creates it and sustains it. And when all of the elements separate, nothing remains. It is clear then that the true essence of all physical beings is the power that combines the four elements, which is the divine utterance that gives it life and creates it every moment. And when all of the elements separate, nothing remains. Okay, Josh, you had a comment.
Yeah, so it is not far from, because it's known that alloys, a combination of a few metals, do not resemble the originals at all. They have new qualities and that were not in the separate elements before. So it's not far that you take air and
and that's when you get down to simple alloys. If you get down to much more complex structures, so then it's even more so. Right. And then they all divide up into their different things. But right. So what holds it all together as one is that's the speech of Hashem that's bringing it all into existence at any moment. And without that pulling it all together, it would all disappear into nothingness. So hence, it is clear that there is no physical substance that is independent of godliness. In other words, when you look at I remember when I was in science class as a kid that they told us that the first idea of the discovery of an atom, the original discovery of an atom, this is what my science teacher told me in 7th grade. I don't know if it's true or not, but I very well remember my science teacher telling us in 7th or 8th grade that the original discovery of an atom was they felt that this was one atom. Each big object was one atom. And then as they discovered further, this is the Greeks in the back, that was the original theory. And then they broke it down to smaller and smaller particles and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And now we're working with subatomic particles and we're breaking it up smaller and smaller. Okay. And everybody thinks, and everybody's trying to find the things.
So it's a thought experiment.
So it's a thought experiment. Okay, so the idea is that when you look at a piece of wood, you say there's a tree. Says the Rebbe, hold on a second, a tree is not just a tree. A tree is a combination of many things. And what's holding it all together and making it into a tree, that's the power of Hashem, that's creating everything into existence in its unique ways, speaking everything to existence in its unique ways at every particular moment. That's what he's trying to say. So when you look at a tree, you say, how do I know the table is real? Well, look, it's a table. Well, hold on a second. It's not really a table. It's a bunch of plants. There's subatomic particles that are running around, and there's probably more space between the solid. Like we all know that there's more space between the solids than there is solid, and the fact that we actually can't put our finger through it is a miracle, is mind-boggling. So in other words, as you break it down into the subatomic particles and the energies and the things, you start to understand the miracle of what you're looking. A table is not really a table.
You're reaching a point that nobody knows.
Nobody knows what anything is because nothing is what it looks like. So when you look at a thing and you say, how do I know the table exists? But hold on a second, that's the most silly proof. That's just what the eye sees. On a subatomic level, it doesn't look like that at all. It's not even the way it appears. So in other words, a smart person realizes that what appears before your eyes is only what you can see, what the eye can see. But there's so much the eye can't see that the eye is not really the best test of anything at all.
And then you can dissect what it means seeing.
Exactly. And then we don't even know what it means to see. Exactly. So therefore, what is true existence? Hence, it is clear that there is no physical substance that is independent of godliness. For in reality, the power of concealment of divinity is as divine as the power of revelation. Now we are getting a very, very important, that is a very, is a very important Kabbalistic statement. It's a very, very important statement, In other words, there's the power כי באמס כוח המסתיר הוא גם כן אלוקות כמו כוח הנגלה. What is more godly, a revelation of godliness or a concealment of godliness? So we always say a revelation of godliness is godly and a concealment is a problem. So it is a problem from our perspective, but remember, only God can hide God. So the power of concealment is just as godly as the power of revelation. The power of concealment is just as godly as the power of revelation. Hence the verse, Ukmesha Kasov, V'chikisi lahavaya, hamastir ponov. I will wait for Havaya even though he hides his face. I will wait for Hashem even though he hides his face. It's a verse in Isaiah. This means that just as there is the revealed Havaya, right? There's Yud Kei Vav Kei as is revealed, Hashem as is revealed. So is there the concealed Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei. The divine powers of concealment and limitation are as divine as the divine power of infinity. In Hebrew, שכוח ההסתר וכוח המגביל הם הליכוס כמו כוח הבלתי בעל גבול. You'll remember this, by the way, that we said the same thing in our Maimah in Emanas Elikus, in the Maimah from the Tzemach Tzedek that we learned at great length. The power to conceal, the forces of concealment, the tzimtzum, all this is coming from Hashem, just as much as the revelation. Or in the classic language of Torah, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Yud Kei Vav Kei is the name of Hashem that reveals. Elokim is the name that conceals. But over here we're saying Havaya Hamasir, the hidden name of Havaya. We said Kishemesh U'Magen Hashem Elokim. Remember that? Kishemesh U'Magen Hashem Elokim, like a sun and its shield, is Yud Kei Vav Kei and Elokim. Elokim conceals Yud Kei Vav Kei. Hashem acts in a revealed way and Hashem acts in a concealed way. And the power to conceal the godly is just as much godly as the power to reveal the godly. The divine powers of concealment and limitation are as divine as the divine power of infinity. As stated in Avodas HaKodesh, this important sefer, by Rabbi Meir Ibn Gabbai of Spain and Egypt, one of the first and foremost systems of the Kabbalah, who wrote the sefer Avodas HaKodesh. So he writes this beautiful articulation of an incredibly powerful idea, and that's why it's so quoted so well, because it's such an incredible articulation. He says, She'im toimer shelikus hu koyach bilti ba'al gvul va'eino koyach b'gvul ata mechaser shleimusai. Incredible, hey? If you consider God to be capable of infiniteness, but incapable of limitation, you have detracted from his completeness. In other words, since God can do anything, he can reveal himself in an infinite way, and he can also conceal. And he can also do the finite. He can operate in the infinite, and he can operate in the finite. He can do whatever he wants. He has the power of infinity, and is the power of the finite as well. In fact, and my friend who's an academic, says that this is the most important line in the whole Maimah that we're about to read. He says, I think this is the one. In fact, the source for limitation is loftier than the source of infinity, or of infiniteness, as explained elsewhere regarding the Rishima. The impression, as it's known, and we're going to look at the footnote in a second, see elsewhere regarding the difference between the levels referred to as Rishima, Chakika, Chatziva, and Asiya, which are impression, engraving, carving, and action. And we're going to read these notes because I want to, and because if I want to, I get to. How does that sound? So note 127 says like this, in Eira Torah Bereshis, volume 7, page 2386, the Tzemach Tzedek explains, when the Tzimtzum occurred, this is what the Rishima is. We've learned about the Rishima. We learned, sometimes it says Rishimu, with a chelim at the end. Over here it's Rishima. I don't know why. I don't know why sometimes it says Rishimu and sometimes it says Rishima. I don't know why. But here it's clear that it's Rishima. Right? That's a good question, and I can tell you that sometimes it says Rishimu and sometimes it's Rishima. So this is something I'm actually very interested in at the moment. This is something I'm pondering for all kinds of reasons, and I'm very excited to read this today.
Okay.
So it's what a wonderful way to come from Simchas Torah. So ladies and gentlemen, this is about as deep as it's going to get into Kabbalistic, into the depths of Kabbalah. This is really one of the deepest things we're ever going to read in our lives. And we're going to try to understand as much of it as we can. And whatever we get, we get. And if we don't get, we don't get. But we're going to try. Okay? But this is about as important okay. In Eira Torah, the Tzemach Tzedek explains, when the Tzimtzum occurred, God's infinite light was removed and concealed. That we all know, right? However, and here, this isn't just from the Tzemach Tzedek. This is an old Kabbalistic concept. A Rishima, an impression of the light, remained. So there was even though the light remained, when I was a child in school, they taught us the Rishima means a stain. Like when you take it out, there's still left a stain. But over here, they're using the word an impression, which is like an imprint. It's like if you push down on a thing and then you walk away, there's a remnant of what was there. That's the point. Almost like a memory, an impression of what was there. You with me?
Yeah.
Subsequently, the kav, Rishima literally means a stain. Am I right, Josh?
Rishima means
a roisha means a trace, is a trace, but it's not a trace.
Or a memory.
A memory over here. Okay. Subsequently, the kav. So then, so you had a makam chalal. You had an empty space, right? You with me? You have first there was light, then there was a withdrawal of the light. And when the light withdrew, you had an empty space. But in the makam chalal, in the empty space, there's a rishima, there's a memory, there's a trace, there's an imprint of the light that was there. There's an imprint, an impression of the light that was there. Subsequently, the kav, a thin thread of light, was made to shine through the remaining impression, by way of which the universe was created. The kav comes back into the makam chalal through the rishima, into where the rishima was, and that's where the light comes through. The impression is the source of the kalim. We learned this in our Maimon in Derech Desech as well. The kav is the oiros, and the makar for the kalim, the source of the kalim. The kav is where the lights come from. The kalim, which means the energy comes from. The kalim, the tools, the vessels, are from the rishima. Although the kav is the aspect of luminary and light, while the rishima, which is latent, and is merely the idea of letters or vessels, it's the idea of them, but not them in practice. Nevertheless, it is a rishima of the general light. Since it's a trace, it's an imprint, it's an impression of the greater light that was before the kav. It's an impression of the infinite light that was before the kav, which illuminated everywhere before the initial tzimtzum, and is not just the contracted light of the kav. So in other words, the rishima, even though the rishima is it's the other side, it's what's left behind, it's the memory of the light. It really has nothing on itself. And therefore it's the beginning of the makam chalal, the empty space. The empty space is really a place where there is no light. But because it remembers the light, so it has a higher, and that's where the kalim come from, by the way. That's where the kalim come from. It's an existence of concealment. It's an absence. The rishima is created from the absence of light. But since it's the absence of the light, it has a memory of a more powerful light. Therefore, it has a source. Therefore, ultimately, the kalim and ultimately the lowest things are going to come from the highest place. Hence, although the advantage of the kav is apparent, because it is light and a revelation, in truth, the rishima is superior. I don't know if it's since I don't even know if it's superior in itself, but it has a superior source, since it is a remaining impression of the general light that preceded the Tzimtzum. And as mentioned above, the Rishim is the source of the Kalim. That is the limitations. Thus, it follows that the source for limitation is loftier than the source of infiniteness. So, in fact, I think, now I don't know. But this might be the first time somebody said that the Sheresh of the Rishima is higher than the Sheresh of the Kav. In other words, this might be that I have to look this up. I'll get back to you next week. I don't know if it's the first time or not, but that's what we're saying. But MS Sheresh HaRishim Unala Yosef B'Koach HaBilti Ba'al Gvul. That the Sheresh, in fact, the source for limitation is loftier than the source of infiniteness, as explained elsewhere regarding the Rishima in the impression. See also, maybe the Tzemach Tzedek himself said that. We have to look this up. See elsewhere regarding the difference between the levels referred to as impression, engraving, carving, and action. Okay, I'm not going to read that together now. This is the meaning of the verse. Indeed, you are a God who conceals himself. Ata kel ochein ata kel mistater. Indeed, you are ochein ata kel mistater, is a famous nigger. Indeed, you are a God who conceals himself. You refers to God's revealed state, where one can address him in the first person and say you. And the verse declares that just as the revealed state is you, so it is truly you in the state of concealment, referring to the divine power of concealment. In other words, when you don't see God, don't think God's not there. You're just seeing God you see God is just operated in a hidden way. And the hidden has God within it just as much as the revealed. In fact, the hidden has a higher source than the revealed. The concealment is a higher source than the revealed.
A question. I mean, we've read these ideas of the creation. How do these guys know this? Was this revealed to them from God, some kind of divine inspiration? Where did it come from that they know these things?
Which things?
All of this, all of these notions of how creation took place. How was it revealed to these people?
Okay, it's a very, very good question. It's a very, very good question.
Well, a lot of it is.
This is not something you would come up with, just randomly.
That is from the Psukim.
It's a very, very, very good question. Jerry's asking a very, very good question. I'm going to answer you that, firstly, it's a very, very, very good question. How did people realize that everything in the world is made up of atoms and subatomic particles and these things? How do you know it? How do they realize it?
First, it was a thought.
First, you had an idea, and then they do experiments, and they discover. So the answer to your question is, and over many, many centuries and years in this, we build one generation builds on the next, and you get to an idea. So the same thing, by the way, that's one answer. And the other way is because God gave us a world, and you examine the world, you'll see it.
You can't see this. This is creation. It happened 5,000 years ago. You can't
see atoms either. Have you ever seen an atom?
Yes.
Have you seen an atom?
Yeah, in an electron microscope.
You saw it?
Yeah.
Really? Has anyone else here seen an atom?
At Columbia, they had an electron microscope.
Okay. So Jerry saw an atom and Lou saw an atom. Rachel, have you seen an atom? I've never seen an atom. Svetlana, do you see an atom?
There are pictures of.
I've never seen it. Okay. But I don't think you have. You seen? No. Okay.
There's
Do you
pictures
believe
of
them do you believe them that they saw it?
There are pictures of it.
Do you
There's
believe
pictures of it. You can see it.
Pictures are nothing. Next thing you're going to tell me that the moon landing is real.
Okay.
You know what I mean? But they saw it. That's enough for me. I believe these guys. They say they saw it. I believe it. I believe it. Now, I don't need to ask you. It's enough. It's enough people have written about it as a thing. They've said even before people saw it, it made sense. You don't have to see things. We've already established you don't have to see things to know it exists. Jerry asked a very important question. How do we know Hashem created the world this way? The answer to your question is a combination of two things: revelation from God It's in a lot of this is in the Torah. A lot of this is in the Torah. A lot of this is in the oral tradition, and a lot of this is oral Kabbalistic traditions that go back thousands of years. A lot of this also is human discovery. By examining the ideas and going deeper into them, you'll come to them. So that's the answer to your question. So I'll give you an example, just a very simple thing. A very simple thing. The Torah says, if you read in the Torah, that it says Hashem created, this week's parsha, it says, Vayomer Elokim Yehi Oyer, and God said, let there be light. So Torah talks about this, all this. If you didn't study the Talmud, you might not have known and realized that the world was created with 10 utterances of speech. Right? So, but you learn the Talmud, you know the tradition, of course it's created through speech. And if you learn a little bit more and you understand what speech is, so let's go deeper. What is speech and what's it doing speech and thought and what's this thing? And then you see verses that also talk about thought, and you talk about, and you see verses that analyze these things. And there's a tradition. So the combination of tradition as well as human exploration and thinking have brought us to the point where we are with these ideas. That's the answer to your question. Revelation as well as analysis.
Can I just, maybe it's not related, but how do you know that music exists or mathematics exists? You don't know that. It's some people can connect to energies and create music, not because they saw it, but because they connect to it.
Exactly. It's a good example. Thank you, Svetlana. That's a great example. So the answer to your question, Jerry, is how do we know that this is right? The answer is both by tradition as well as by mental contemplation. These things have been revealed, and we understand that that's the way it is. Now, how do we know that there was first a light and then the light withdrew? How do we know there's a tzimtzum? We know there's a tzimtzum because we can't see God. We know there's a tzimtzum because you don't see Hashem. That's how you know there's a tzimtzum. All right? In other words, God is concealed. That is tzimtzum. That means tzimtzum. The concealment of God is tzimtzum. How is it that you don't see God, Jerry?
I can't answer that question because he's beyond my ability to.
Why is God beyond your? How is it that you can't perceive God? How is it that God is hidden? The answer is the idea that God is hidden. How does an infinite God become hidden? How does infinity come to be concealed? How do you exist? How do you even have an awareness that's separate? So if you do,
I don't have it. There's two things here. I don't have any problem accepting this. These ideas. My only question is, how did these guys come up with these ideas? Now, if you say it's divine revelation, okay, I got it. Okay, but if that's the answer, I'm happy with that.
The answer to it is the combination of divine revelation and deep contemplation. That's divine revelation. The Torah is divine revelation. So by the answer to your question is through divine revelation and deep contemplation. That's the answer to your question. And in order to really understand it, you can access it. In order to access it, there's two ways we can access it. We can access it with the acceptance of it as the acceptance of a divine revelation. We can access it and accept it and integrate it into our lives as the acceptance of a divine revelation. It's what's written and we'll accept it. That's the one way of accessing it. But that's really the lazy way to access it. Because that's the way that doesn't require deep contemplation. The true way we're supposed to access this is through deep contemplation. To actually do the mental work of getting these ideas. You don't have to. You have to do the mental work
That it's a-
to think about this stuff,
Okay.
to access this, not only that it's written in the book, so this is the way
Yeah.
it is, but that actually this is the most, this is the
Yeah.
most, this
Integrated
this
that
is the this is a wisdom. This is
Yeah. You have to become the
this is all that makes sense. No, you don't. You don't have to become the Rebbe Maharash to access this. In fact, it's possible to understand these ideas and Pashut be a grobyung.
Huh.
You just have to, a grobyung means a coarse individual. You just have to be willing to use your brain.
Wow.
You have to be willing to do mental exercises.
So it's not a grab you.
So it's possible to have the brilliant brain and still be a very coarse person. That's a
Not
difference.
if you understand that.
Well, the truth is you're right, that learning Chassidus is going to refine a person. Learning Chassidus is going to refine a
I
person.
know it for myself.
Learning Chassidus is going to refine a person. It's true. So anyway, the answer to your question is, the answer to your question is both divine revelation and human contemplation. If you think about it deeply, you'll understand that this is, there's nothing being said over here that isn't obvious.
Oh, I disagree with that.
There's nothing being said over here that isn't obvious.
I don't believe that for a second.
if you, the only for a person who's willing to think.
Ah.
For example, the statement that we quoted from the Avodas HaKodesh, the statement we quoted by the Avodas HaKodesh before, where he said, which is an incredible articulation of an idea. If you consider God to be capable of infiniteness, but incapable of limitation, you have detracted from his completeness. It tells you that God has the power of the infinite and the power of the finite.
Hmm.
And that is it's actually a mathematical conclusion, right? It's a mathematical, you could see as a math, to say that he had to have been it's a brilliant mind to be able to say that God has to have every power. He's a great philosopher. God has to have every power. And therefore he has the power of infinite and the power of the finite in order to be complete. That's an incredible articulation of an idea, which is at the core of what we're saying over here. So at the core of
This is a note in the Tanya, because you can't say that God is infinite, because that implies that God is not finite, and there's nothing that God is not.
Exactly. So it's very good. This is we've spoken about this in the Tanya as well. It's a very famous line. So the point is, as I said before, what we're accessing over here is both a combination of both of divine revelation and incredible human understanding. And the Rebbes of Chabad, the whole concept of Chabad Hasidism, the whole concept of Chabad Hasidus is that regular people like you and me, Josh, that are not tzaddikim, have to use the faculties of our intellect, Chachma bin Adas, to try to understand these ideas.
Yeah.
There are other schools in Judaism who said,
That only it's
who said, don't worry about understanding this stuff. You don't need to learn this stuff. You don't need to learn this stuff because you don't need to learn this stuff. The rebel will learn it. The tzaddik will learn it, and you will rely on the tzaddik, and finished. And
But it was a period where people said you're not allowed to learn this stuff.
there were people that said you're not allowed to learn. They were afraid. You start teaching this stuff to people, it's going to mess everything up. They're not going to get it. So came along the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe said, no, we have to bring everything down into this world as much as possible. Now, what the Rebbe Maharash is saying over here, but the Rebbe Maharash saying that the finite has a higher, that the kalim have a higher source, right, than the things. It means the power, he's emphasizing more and more. This is the development of ideas in Hasidus about the importance of bringing the highest down to the lowest, because ultimately it's a circle. and that we have to make the home for Hashem in the physical world, and it's important, therefore, to use our brains. We have to use our brains, and from our brains into other things, we can't let any part of this not get accessed. So the answer is, therefore, more than this, we can say, oh, it's a revelation, and that's the easy way.
Yeah.
The easy way is say somebody else revealed it, and I don't have to understand it.
No, I wouldn't buy that. I would say someone revealed it, and I have to understand
Okay,
it.
good. That's exactly.
I don't have any problem with that, but I will not accept you saying that this is obvious. Okay,
It's absolutely obvious.
Huh?
Obvious.
That I can't buy.
Obvious. It's obvious. It's obvious.
Okay.
There's a Jerry. You study Talmud. You
Yeah.
study Talmud, and you know almost every page of the Talmud. Somebody says something, and somebody says, "Oh, that's obvious."
Yeah,
Heck, it's not obvious. It's obvious to people that anyone who's done 17 years of Talmudic knowledge will know it's obvious, right? The obvious is usually not so obvious. You've got to.
I'm saying it's logical.
It's logical. That's what I meant. It's not only. A lot of it is revelation. Of course, there's revelation. I'm not minimizing the part of this that's revelation. Don't get me wrong, but a lot of it is it's the, if you do the analysis, it's the most logical explanation for everything.
but I will tell you what used to get me very annoyed in the advanced calculus class. In the book, there'd be something, and they said the proof is trivial and left to the student. Okay, there were no proofs. Okay, so it used to bother me a lot, and this is why this takes a lot of study, because it's not.
It takes a lot of study, but more than it doesn't just take reading, it takes contemplation.
Yes, yeah.
It takes contemplation. That's the work we have to do. Now, at the same time, we have to do is bring these ideas into, make them relevant in our own lives. And this statement that the source of limitation is loftier than the source of the infiniteness is one of the most important statements we'll ever read in our lives. Because on a personal level, this means that the source of concealment is higher than the source of revelation. And sometimes a lot of the time, we live with concealment. And we think concealment is bad and revelation is good. But we have to understand that not sometimes, but always, in the concealment, there's a higher source than in the revelation. This is in the concealment, there's a higher source than the revelation.
This is that connected to I think we learned that the Behemish and the Shuma comes from that higher.
And that's connected to the idea that the Nefesh Bahamis has a higher source than the Bahamish, Nesa Bahamit. The animal soul has a higher source than the godly soul.
So
And the Klippa ultimately is going to have a higher source than the Kedusha, which is crazy. But not to say that but we don't sanctify it in and of itself. Hashem told us what to do, take Torah, not the sin.
So they are connected.
But
Everything's connected.
so I was going to ask, speaking of analysis, if I may,
Yes.
I think this is the same question. Why is the Rishima considered a higher source than the Kav? And how do we come to that conclusion where does that conclusion come from, that limitation has a higher source?
So here's the idea.
I
Understand here. So here's the idea.
Yeah.
So you have a room filled with light. Imagine you have a room filled with light. Right? You got it?
That's easy.
Now all the light withdraws. Now there's no more light. Now you only have darkness. You with me? Now, well, let's use some of let's go back to the basics of the model. Let's draw the model for ourselves. You have the infinite light of Hashem over here, right? Infinite light, revelation, you have the infinite light of God. And then you got a world down here where you see what we see. We know what this world looks like, right? And you got lots of stages, 4 worlds in the middle and everything else, the whole Seder Ishtalshalos, the whole progression. You with me? Remember this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have the infinite light over here, and then you've got what we have down here, and you have a whole system of progression. So we learned the first thing is there was a complete withdrawal of the infinite light. There was a complete withdrawal of the infinite light. The Arizal taught us. We read it from the words of the Arizal in another book at another time. And all that was left was a makam chalol, an empty space. And then another light comes through. Just you see if the infinite light is shining, you can't have this world because you're too aware of the infinite. In order to have the world the way we know it, the infinite has to be concealed. You need concealment. We need symptom. We need concealment, right? Everyone understand why we need concealment. If you don't have concealment, you won't have an existence. You'll never have the temptation to do a sin in your life. Right?
Okay.
So in order to have free choice, in order to have a world as we know it, you need concealment. So the infinite light withdraws. So now you have no light. Stop. So imagine almost like this phase is a room with no light. That's the source. The source of all concealment is that room of no light. With me?
Okay.
Okay. Now in this world, you're going to have light and you're going to have vessels. So we used an example, and the vessels, you have light and you have vessels. The light is the revelation. The vessel is a concealment. I'll give you an example why. Let's say you have a clear light and you want it to, you need, in order to have this world, you need 10 spheres. We've spoken about the fact, in order to have this world, you need 10 spheres. Why do you need 10 spheres? Because you need chesed and you need gvura. You need to have kindness and you need to have cruelty. You need to have kindness and you need to have cruelty. You need to have love and you also need to have punishment. You need it. In order for a world like this to exist, you need these different forces. You with me? You need to have these. In other words, in order for the world to exist the way it is, you need lots and lots of classifications into lots and lots of differences. Things have to become very compartmentalized. And then we create a big cholent where everything gets confusing. But you need this world is a world of multiplicity. By definition, it's a world of multiplicity. But before you have a world, you only have oneness. So how do you get multiplicity out of oneness? So what we said is what you have the infinite light, which is clear. It's like it's pure. But it gets filtered through lots of different filters, lots of different kalim to make all the differences that you have in this world. So the power of creation comes from the light. The energy comes from the light. The differences come from the kalim. Is this all clear to everybody through the vessels, through the filters?
So kalim is like a prism.
The kalim is like the prism. Exactly. The kalim is like a prism that makes it go into a different. So we use the example of a prism, but if you keep it more simple, you have a red glass and a green glass and a blue glass, and as it goes through a particular filter, it will come out in a different color, right? And therefore, you'll get all the differences that you have in the world. So 1 second. So the source of the kalim, where's the source? So 1 second. Every time you see a difference, it's a concealment of God. Every time you see two different things, it's a concealment of the oneness of Hashem. God is oneness in his purest form, is unity. There's oneness and unity. Anytime there's differences, it's a concealment. Anytime there's differences, it's a concealment. So kalim create the differences. So kalim are the forces of concealment. Kalim are the forces of concealment. You with me? So where do kalim get their source from? What's the first concealment? It's the tzimtzum, it's the makam cholol, it's the empty space. That room, that empty room where the light departed from is the source for all later kalim. is the source for all later vessels, all later filters, all later the differences. And as you get lower and lower, the differences get bigger and bigger. And the concealment, the oneness becomes less obvious. As you get lower and lower, oneness becomes less obvious. Differences become more obvious. So all kalim come from the Rishima. Kalim come from the Rishima. Vessels, differences, filters, whatever you want to call them, tools come from the Rishima.
That was his question.
Wait a second. Kalim come from the Rishima. And light comes from the light is the light that we have in this world is the Irakav, the straight light that goes down to fill the world, to penetrate the things. Okay, you with me on that part so far? Everybody good with us? Good. Now comes the question, hold on a second, why is the Rishima? So when you're in that Makam Cholol, so the Makam Cholol creates the differences. But that seems lower than the light that preceded it. That's Rachel's question. The darkness is lower than the light. So you had light, then you have darkness, and then you have light that comes back in again. So let's explore that period of darkness. In that period of darkness, you have something else. You have a memory. You have the memory of the light that was.
That's the tough one.
You have the memory of the light that was. That's the Rishima. You have the memory of the light that was. And that, it's very deep. Let's go a little deeper for a second.
Is that what creates the vessels? The memory of the light that was? And who remembers
The
it?
saddest thing in the world is the memory of a loss.
Mm,
The pain of a loss. Right?
it's true.
You lost something. When you lose something, it leaves a terrible void. When you lose something, it leaves a terrible void.
Mm.
What do they say? But nevertheless, better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all.
Yeah.
So the memory of the loss, as painful as it is, gives you access to that which you lost.
Mm.
The memory of the loss gives you access to that which you lost. So it's the darkness after the light that becomes the source of the vessels. That's the Rishima. But because it gives you, it's the pain of the loss, it's the darkness that gives you, that's where all future darkness is going to come from there. All future darkness comes from there. But there's also the memory of what you lost. And therefore, that has a higher source. Because if you didn't have the pain of loss, you wouldn't have all future concealments. But at the same time, it has its source in the greatest light.
Mm.
That, I think, is the answer to your question.
So the memory, that
That's amazing. Thank you.
darkness
Thank you.
is the memory of the
If this is true, I think this is it. If this is true, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to spend the next week thinking about this. If this is true, it's a pretty good articulation of the idea. I'm not sure that it's completely true. So I will get back to you next week for more about this. Stay tuned as we continue exploring these ideas of the thing. We're going to take a break now, ladies and gentlemen, from this class.
You think about it,
And
the memory
I'll-
of the light that was the
That's the idea of the Rishima. So thank you very much, everybody, for